Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, your lines have been placed on listen only until we open for questions and answers. To ask a question, you may press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be advised today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ms. Sarah Shrimplin. Please go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Hello and welcome to the second webinar in the series Women in Aging, titled Women in Caregiving. My name is Sarah Shrimplin. I'm the Regional Women's Health Coordinator for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Region 3, which consists of Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. This is the second webinar in a 5-part series planned and coordinated in collaboration among the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Region 3 office and the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. Planning members include myself, representing the Office on Women's Health, Leslie Green from the Administration for Community Living, and Kate Clark, Planner for Policy and Program Development and Chair at the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, as well as the 2013 to 2015 Atlantic Philanthropics Health and Aging Policy Fellow with the Office of the Surgeon General. This collaborative effort shadows the principles outlined within the National Prevention Strategy, most specifically a strategy drafted by the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging and aligned with the National Prevention Strategy, called Aging and the National Prevention Strategy. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be archived. If you see problem with participating in this webinar recording, please feel welcome to disconnect and leave the webinar at this time. This event will include presentations from 3 experts within the aging field, followed by time for questions. You have 2 options for participating in the Q&A. You can both write down your questions and hold on to them until the operator accepts questions at the conclusion of the presentations, or you can submit your questions via utilization of the Q&A box in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And now for introductions to our featured presenters, Dr. Jennifer Wolfe and Ms. Cheryl Clark-Woods. Dr. Jennifer Wolfe is Associate Professor of Health Policy and Management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Wolfe holds a joint appointment in the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Wolfe's principal areas of research are related to health delivery, family caregiving, and the development and evaluation of innovative models of chronic care delivery for vulnerable older adults with complex care needs. She has served as PI and co-investigator on NIH, AHRQ, PCORI, and Foundation-sponsored intervention trials of novel models of care. Dr. Wolfe has published approximately 70 peer-reviewed manuscripts and has authored numerous book chapters, commissioned papers, and invited commentaries. She is a graduate of the Bloomberg School of Public Health, where she earned both her Master's of Health Science and doctoral degrees in Health Services Research prior to joining the faculty in 2003. Ms. Cheryl Clark-Woods is Director of the Caregiver Support Program at Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, also known as PCA. She has more than 25 years' experience working with the geriatric population in both direct service and supervisory positions. Previous positions at PCA during her 17-year tenure with the agency include Supervisor for Behavioral Health, Referral Center for Older Adults and Care Manager Supervisor in the Long-Term Care Options Department. Ms. Clark-Woods has also worked with Alzheimer's and dementia patients at an older adult inpatient psychiatric unit and in private duty home care. She obtained her Master's of Social Work Administration from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, before I turn this webinar on to Dr. Wolfe, we have the pleasure of hearing from someone who understands caregiving from a personal perspective. Judith Vick is, in addition to being a busy medical student at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, she's also been the caregiver of her mother. It's because of situations like Judith's that understanding and educating public health professionals about caregiving is incredibly important and really the reasoning for us having this webinar today. We're very fortunate to have her share her story. And so now I'll turn things over to Judith. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you for having me here today. It's a great honor to be speaking with you today. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a second-year medical student here at Hopkins, and one day I hope to be part of such a program like this one based on my scholarly contributions. Today, though, I'm here to tell you about the past year or so of my life during which I very suddenly became a family caregiver. This is my mom when she was about my age. Here she is about a year and a half ago with her granddaughter, my niece. Between the first photo and the second, she married my dad, had 3 kids, got her PhD, raised her kids, worked as a museum curator, taught at various universities, divorced my dad, and then about a year and a half ago, she got engaged to be married. In November 2014, she had just turned 63. Before that, she'd been a vegetarian and had not consumed refined sugar for about 30 years. She had a rather bland past medical history. Then, on November 26, 2014, she had a massive hemorrhagic stroke while visiting my older brother and his family in Jerusalem with her fiancé, Bob. The neurosurgeon at the hospital performed an emergency craniotomy and then an emergency craniectomy to remove nearly half of her skull to give her swollen brain a place to go. I had been studying for an exam on the gastrointestinal system when I got the phone call about my mom's brain bleed. Instead of taking the exam, I flew to Israel. So did my younger brother and his wife. When we arrived, my mom was in the surgical ICU. She then went to the neurosurgical ICU, then the medical ICU, and about 2.5 weeks after the bleed to a regular medical unit. Around then, we were told it was as good a time as any to transport her back to the United States. To get her there, we bought 16 airplane seats on the back of a regular commercial flight, and that's what this picture shows. From Tel Aviv, we flew to Newark, where a Hopkins patient transport ambulance met us and drove us to Baltimore. Insurance didn't cover the international trip, but did cover the ride down from New Jersey. By this point, it was abundantly clear that my mom's recovery process was going to take a very long time. At that point, I had been away from school for about 3 weeks, and while technically I probably could have caught up on the material that I missed, I decided to take a year away from medical school to have the flexibility to be with my mom during her recovery. After being at Hopkins, my mom went to acute rehab, and here's a photo of her with her helmet in acute rehab, and then subacute rehab, and then to Hopkins to have a synthetic skull implanted, then back to subacute rehab, then back to Hopkins with dehydration and C. diff, then back to subacute rehab. In case you lost count, that's 8 places of care and 10 transitions of care in just a few months. Finally, at the beginning of April 2014, 4 months after my mom's stroke, my mom finally made it home, though the truth is she's been back in the hospital another 2 times since then. But when my mom went home in April, I also moved back there to the house where I grew up. I moved back from my downtown row home to my childhood bedroom. My mom's fiancé basically moved in too. When she came home, my mom needed maximum assistance, lifting really, to move from bed to chair to commode. She couldn't balance on the edge of the bed herself. In the bed, she couldn't roll from one side to the other. In the bed, she needed to be positioned with her neck on the exact right spot on the pillow, 2 pillows under her knees, stabilizing boot on her left foot, hot water bottle and heating pad perfectly in place. We called this positioning gussying her up. My mom had absolutely no movement on her left side, not in her arm, not in her leg. She regularly neglected the left side of her body. She'd hold her left hand with her right and ask, "Why is there a fake arm in my lap?" She needed reminders to eat the food from the left side of her plate, to wipe debris from the left side of her face, to notice if her nose was running from her left nostril. She couldn't, and she still can't be left alone. What if she needs to use the bathroom? What if she tries to get out of bed and she falls? What would happen in an emergency? And it's more than the basics that my mom needs. She needs a caregiver, a companion, and a coach. She's had amazing physical, occupational, and speech therapists. But in order to recover, what everyone says is that she needs to be working when she isn't in therapy sessions. She needs someone to encourage her to stay sitting up, not lying down. She needs someone to encourage her to do everyday things on her own, like take the toothbrush cap off the toothpaste herself, even though it's far easier to just do things for her. She also needs someone to talk to her about her art history, the art history that she loves. She needs someone to encourage her to work through her pain so that she can redevelop strength to be able to roll over in bed, to get out of bed, to get to the bathroom, and we all hope, my mom especially, to stand, to walk, and to get on with her life. She basically needs a son or daughter who's not an actual son or daughter. When my mom came home in April, I was the main hands-on caregiver. waking up with her in the middle of the night to transfer her to the commode, staying at home all the time to assist my mom with every activity. When my mom had her stroke, she was instantaneously transformed from perfectly healthy and independent to being very dependent on another person to do even the most basic of activities. I, too, instantaneously lost my independence the night of my mom's stroke, always being on call for my mom. Soon after my mom came home in April, we hired an aide. The aide we hired was nice, and she could transfer my mom, but she'd come 30 minutes, 2 hours, an hour late, 45 minutes late. She was unreliable, and for the first time in my life, I had to fire someone. I went from being a medical student to being a caregiver and a manager, hiring and firing. When I fired our first aide, we hired someone new. She's competent, and she takes good care of my mom. But then we happened to find Kevin, the stepson of my mom's visiting nurse. I could go on and on and on about how wonderful Kevin was this past summer. This is a photo here of Kevin in the middle. But what's relevant here is that it was largely luck that we found such a perfect fit. He had no prior experience, and we only found him when I was casually talking to my mom's visiting nurse. And he's a college student and was only in Baltimore over the summer. He went back to school at the end of August, and we're still searching for a stable, long-term caregiver situation. In some ways, my family is incredibly fortunate. My mom's acute care in Israel saved her life. The bleed was on the right side of her brain, and she's right-handed, so she has the use of her dominant side, and her language is preserved. I had recently moved back to Baltimore for med school at Hopkins, and I was able to take a year off from my medical school academics to have the flexibility to be with her and to work with Jennifer Wolf in her research on caregivers in the healthcare system, which has been the absolute perfect job for me, and Jennifer's an incredibly understanding boss. And, of course, how lucky we are to be able, until this point, to pay for my mom's long-term care. Her Jewish community has been tremendously generous in many ways, including helping us with costs, but the funds are limited. She's 64 and she doesn't have Medicare. We don't qualify for Medicaid, and we don't know how long my mom will need a paid caregiver. Most importantly, my mom and I are incredibly lucky to have Bob. He literally saved my mom's life the night she had the stroke. He's the most wonderful, caring, and loving man. He's worthy of my mom, and I don't say that about anyone. In fact, he's the only person I've ever felt that way about. On June 30th, 2015, 6 months after my mom's stroke, my two brothers wheeled my mom halfway down the aisle, and she walked the rest of the way with me on her left and Kevin on her right to join Bob under the chuppah, and they were married. But as lucky as we are, and as joyous as the wedding was, and as much progress as my mom has made, there are still tremendously complicated issues. How do I find adequate care for my mom, and how are we going to pay for it? How am I going to find an attendant to provide hands-on help who is good, who will be able to give my mom all that she needs? This is all so overwhelming for my mom, so overwhelming for Bob, and so overwhelming for me. I have this nagging inner voice, of course, that tells me that the caregiving issue isn't really an issue. I myself can do everything I've told you my mom needs. She has access to me, so she has access to care. And I know I can give her quality care. After all, it's only relatively recently in the history of healthcare that we expect others, and not family, to be the ones primarily taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. Of course, no professional has ever indicated this to me, that I should be doing the hands-on work, that it's better for my mom for this to be the case. In fact, I've been told the opposite. It's best for her and for all of us to return to normalcy as much as possible, as soon as possible. For me, as a 30-year-old woman, not to live with my mom and her husband. For my mom to try and make her own appointments, for her to put her makeup on herself, for her to post on Facebook, as nonsensical as some of her posts are. And certainly, if I'm going to become a doctor and contribute to society in that way, in a way I want to more now than I ever did before, I need to finish medical school, which means I can't be there for my mom and her husband all of the time or even much of the time. And that's to say nothing of my emotional well-being and my relationship with my mom. I can't be her caregiver, coach, and doctor in training and also be her loving daughter. And that last role, the role of the loving daughter, is who I want to be for my mom. Thank you again for having me speak today. I'm inspired and hopeful that there are so many professionals working on these problems, and I'm very appreciative. And now I'll pass things back over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Judith. And now we'll hear from Dr. Jennifer Wolf. Jennifer?
Hi. I'm really very pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to this webinar on the important topic of family caregiving as part of the Women in Aging seminar series. In my talk, I'll be a little bit provocative and challenge some of what we think we might know about the facts of family caregiving as a way to stimulate new ideas and thinking about this critically important but in many ways under-recognized and undervalued aspect of the healthcare and long-term services and supports workforce. And I'm not sure how there we go. So we would all probably agree that family is the major unit in which health is produced throughout the lifespan, certainly in childhood and adolescence, but also in mid and late life, particularly in the case of incapacity, disability, or recovery from an acute health event. As highlighted in Judith's talk, family caregiving is in many ways just what families do. However, given the diversity of family structure and interpersonal relationships, as well as the profound nature of transfers within families that span emotional support, financial transfers, as well as practical and instrumental help that relates to personal care and household assistance, family caregiving can be very challenging to study, and meeting the needs of family caregivers can be very challenging as well, given that there's really not a single one-size-fits-all approach that's likely to work. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to draft the background paper on the family caregiving workforce for the Institute of Medicine Retooling for an Aging America report. And within the context of the broader report, it was particularly striking to consider differences between the professional healthcare workforce, which is educated and credentialed to function within a clearly defined scope of practice, most often in a controlled setting like a hospital, a nursing home, or a physician office, with the workforce of family caregivers who most often accidentally fall into the role of providing help to someone they love, typically without any formal education or preparation for the roles that they assume. Family caregivers are in many ways the ultimate in integrated care in that they follow individual patients across settings from hospital to post-acute care to nursing home and back home again, as Judith described in her talk. They really patch together a fragmented service environment and assist with a wide range of lifestyle and behavioral treatments, healthcare therapies, medication management activities, some of which are listed on this slide. However, despite playing an integral role in care, family caregivers are not formally equipped or prepared for the responsibilities that they are expected to assume, and may as often be marginalized or even ignored in processes or systems of care. This quote from the American Medical Association captures the idea that America overwhelmingly relies on a shadow workforce of family caregivers and chronic care delivery, the typical profile being a middle-aged woman who works full-time, has children, and who's not well-educated or prepared for her role. The main point that I want to make here is the notion that family caregivers are largely invisible to both healthcare as well as long-term services and support systems. Because family caregivers operate outside formally recognized professional practices, financing, and regulatory arrangements, their presence is not systematically captured in a way that allows an understanding of how commonly they are present at various points in care processes, such as at the time of inpatient hospital discharge. Likewise, outside of national surveys, it's not clear when patients receive help from a family caregiver or rely on a family caregiver what activities family caregivers perform or how family involvement impacts quality and outcomes of the care. As a result, it is not clear what benefits might be derived by more explicit partnership and support of family caregivers within the delivery systems for patients, for family caregivers themselves, or for society. I would posit that the ability to move beyond thinking about family caregivers as a shadow workforce will hinge on better consensus and shared definitions about some basic issues, including the size of the workforce. It turns out that the answer to the question of how many family caregivers exist depends on who one asks. This paper, published in the Milbank Quarterly several years ago, found that the estimated number of family caregivers to disabled older adults varies tenfold across national surveys. The height of the 4 left bars on the figure represents the number of family caregivers who are estimated from disability surveys in which a defined population of older adults is asked about who helps them with specific tasks over a given time period. We see on looking at the left set of bars that disability surveys yield on average a relatively tight band of about 5 million caregivers to older adults between the time period of 1996 and 2004. In contrast, looking at the far right set of bars, which present estimates from national surveys where caregivers are asked to self-identify as providing help to an older adult, but without referring to a specific defined population of care recipients, that the number of family caregivers to older adults average is about 24 million. The main point here is that there's no single definition or approach to measuring family caregivers, and that definitions do matter in the ability to understand and interpret what we think is known about who family caregivers are, as well as what their experiences are. So the information presented on the prior slide focused on family caregivers of older adults, but family caregiving occurs throughout the life course. This figure plots the relationship of caregivers to receivers across the lifespan. And we can see that who provides help varies greatly with age. With greater age of the care recipient, parents, who are shown in blue, are not surprisingly less likely to assume the role of family caregiver, whereas in middle age, through the young older age groups, family caregivers are most often spouses, shown in green. And among the oldest olds, family caregivers are most likely to be an adult child, shown in red, followed by a paid helper or helpers, shown in yellow. So not surprisingly, the age and relationships of family caregivers and the people they assist raise somewhat different sets of policy issues in terms of employment implications, financial consequences, as well as the physical capacity to provide care and the reasons for care provision. With population aging and advances in medicine, it is not uncommon to encounter grandparent caregivers or aging caregivers of adult children with developmental disabilities or mental illnesses. One of the fundamental challenges in the study of family caregiving is the vast heterogeneity across varied circumstances. Every situation is unique, and in some ways it's difficult to generalize knowledge about the caregiving experience or impacts of care provision given this variability. Meta-analyses pool information across large numbers of studies and allow us to make a more compelling case about characteristics of a given population. Martin Pinkart and Sylvia Sorensen have published a number of meta-analyses on family caregiving over the years. In this paper, they synthesized the results of 168 studies to compare relational differences of spousal caregivers, adult-child caregivers, and children-in-law caregivers, pulling from about 65,000 caregivers overall. For simplicity's sake here, I show information about spouses and adult children caregivers only. Not surprisingly, they find spouses are more likely to be married, less likely to be employed, more likely to live with the recipient, and that they provide about twice as many hours of care relative to adult child caregivers. Within the context of the particular focus of this seminar series, the information presented in the table supports the belief that family caregiving is a woman's issue. The third row, bracketed in green, indicate that nearly 2/3 of spousal caregivers and more than 3/4 of adult child caregivers are women. The last point that I want to make on this slide is that these estimates across 168 studies find spousal caregivers provide an average of 56 hours of care per week, that adult children provide 27 hours of help per week. And by anyone's definition, this is a lot of help over a long period of time, with the length of caregiving about 6 years on average. So there's strong consensus that family caregivers contribute enormous economic value related to long-term services and supports, although how to quantify and value the care that's provided is highly complex. This slide displays a figure from the Congressional Budget Office report, which was published in 2011, or 2013, I'm sorry, which valued the economic contributions of family caregivers to older adults at $234 billion in 2011 dollars. Data presented in this figure indicates that more than half of the economic value of long-term services and supports to older adults is derived from unpaid family caregivers involving no transfers of money. An additional 14% of long-term services and supports involve community-based supports and services, and 31% is delivered in institutions. The main point here is that the majority of older adults with disabilities compensate in a manner that is largely outside the scope of formal service delivery and for which no payment is exchanged. Estimates by government agencies, advocacy groups, and health economists vary widely in the assumptions used to estimate family caregivers' hourly wages, out-of-pocket costs, foregone wages, as well as the time and types of activities for which caregivers assist. But despite this variability, the estimates of the economic value provided through family caregiving are uniformly high, and there is a strong consensus that family caregivers are the backbone of long-term services and supports delivery. So this is a time of striking change in the expectation and experience of mid and late life, given declines in fertility, delayed marriage, evolving gender roles, geographic mobility, and greater rates of childbirth outside of marriage, all which collectively challenge the conventional definition and structure of family. And we are now seeing more diversity in family caregivers and the circumstances under which they provide care. Although caregivers come in all shapes and sizes, as we saw on the prior slide, family caregivers are consistently most often found to be middle-aged parents, daughters, or spouses who typically live together or within close proximity of the person they assist. The plight of the sandwich generation caregiver who's strained by simultaneously caring for parents as well as young children while maintaining a full-time job is well recognized, with many implications for caregivers as well as for workplace productivity, although the evidence regarding workplace productivity and consequences is limited. The growing dialogue, however, on paid family leave is certainly promising in this area. The shifting policy landscape away from nursing home care towards home and community-based services has important implications for family caregivers. And it's the growing numbers of older adults with multiple chronic conditions and greater complexity of care has meant that family caregivers are increasingly responsible for wide-ranging healthcare activities that pertain to advocacy, medical decision-making, monitoring and adherence to prescribed treatments, coordination of health information, maintenance and operation of medical equipment, and managing patient transitions across settings of care, such as from hospital to home. Sorry, So because of the presence and nature of family caregiver involvement in health delivery processes is not systematically captured the way vital statistics and diagnoses are in medical charts or billing data, most of the hard evidence about the role that family caregivers play in delivery processes comes from national survey data, with some elaboration and insight from convenience samples, qualitative studies, or clinical trials that ask about family caregivers' experiences within systems of care. Despite tremendous variability in the estimated numbers of caregivers and the valuation of their time, there's strong consensus that family caregivers provide the overwhelming majority of assistance with long-term services and supports, as well as chronic care. Recent attention has been drawn to the fact that family caregivers often assist with delivering complex medical care in the home and are involved in transitioning patients across settings of care, often with little preparation or support. Using a variety of analytic methods, I found that about 40% of older adults attend medical visits with a family member or friend, and these older adults tend to be more vulnerable across dimensions of age, education, and health. However, strategies that support purposeful partnerships between healthcare providers, patients, and family caregivers are not well developed. For example, educational programs to train health professionals on how to communicate with both patients and families have not been well developed, and reimbursement incentives for provider services typically do not incentivize additional time and effort to educate or counsel family caregivers with the necessary skills or knowledge to enact a patient's care plan. I want to present three slides from a recent study that I want to use to illustrate a few simple points and hopefully stimulate discussion. My overarching point is that credible evidence regarding family caregivers' involvement in the delivery processes is pivotal to understanding potential benefits and opportunities from their more effective integration and support. I want to highlight a rare exception of what we can say about the role of family caregivers in two specific delivery processes, both accompanying older adults to physician visits and assisting with prescribed medications. These activities are now asked about in several national surveys, including the National Health and Aging Trends Study, which is the source of these data. On the figure, we see depicted that about two-thirds of community-dwelling older adults, or 21 million older adults, manage their medications independently and attend doctor visits alone. About 9 million in the middle bar receive help with either physician visits or prescribed medicines, and about 3 million older adults on the far right, or about 1 in 10, receive help with both physician visits and prescribed medications. We looked at these two activities for opportunistic reasons, given that they were asked about in the survey. However, I'd like to note that these activities are of particular relevance to policy and clinical care from the perspective that the physician visit is pivotal in screening and population health management, and that prescription medications are a critical element of most chronic care regimens, and that being helped with prescribed medications is a flag for having suspected cognitive impairment. We looked at the identity of the people who helped with these activities, and 95% were spouses, adult children, and other family members or friends. Less than 5% were paid. This slide presents the same three groups of older adults receiving help with neither, either, or both physician visits and prescribed medicines, stratified by a summary measure of cognitive function that draws from self and proxy reports as well as a performance-based measure. Looking from left to right, we see that older adults receiving help with either or both physician visits and prescribed medications were incrementally more likely to have possible or probable cognitive impairment, shown in darker blue in the upper segment of each bar. Focusing on just the far right bar, we see that of the 3.3 million older adults receiving help with both physician visits and prescribed medications, that nearly half, or 46%, were categorized as having probable dementia, and an additional 17% as having possible dementia. This information has profound implications for thinking about appropriate targeting of interventions for at-risk older adults, as well as for identifying family caregivers who could be at risk as well and who could benefit from education to better meet the needs of the patient or themselves in receiving screening or supports to meet their own needs. The final data slide I'd like to present displays the average weekly hours of help provided to community-dwelling older adults by virtue of whether the person who was helping them helped with neither, either, or both physician visits and prescribed medicines. The left panel presents hours of help for all helpers of older adults, whereas the right set of bars shows the same information among the subset of caregivers assisting older adults with mobility and self-care. Here we see, looking at the left set of bars, that people who helped older adults with both physician visits and prescribed medicines provided on average 45 hours of help per week, which is more than double that of those who assisted with either or neither activity. The big picture point that I want to make is that this type of credible, specific information is critical to informing policymakers and delivery organizations about why family caregivers matter, how often they're involved, who they help, why identifying and partnering with them may help provide higher quality and more efficient care, and how to identify and support family caregivers who are at greatest risk. These data eliminate the potential benefit of identifying family caregivers in systems of care, such as physician visits, as well as the type of screening questions that might be used to flag individuals who are at risk. So it's always easier to point to challenges than to solutions, and as a researcher, I always feel guilty when suggesting a recommendation of more research. But in this case, the absence of information about how often, in what settings, for which patients, and in what ways family caregivers are involved in systems of care, as well as how their involvement impacts processes and outcomes, is a real impediment to making the case for why the paradigm needs to change. One of the challenges in filling the gaps in knowledge is that standard assessments that are used in the care of patient populations are typically patient-oriented only. So the information about who's helping them, as well as their experiences and needs, is never collected. Another challenge is there are a number of extremely challenging workforce issues in that providers of care are typically not educated or financially compensated for communicating with and educating family caregivers is a part of fee-for-service payments. Most delivery involves assessments and corresponding information systems that emphasize biomedical risk factors and that are narrowly focused on the patient rather than the patient within the context of their broader family environment as well as helping network. Another challenge is that although many successful interventions to support family caregivers have been developed and tested with demonstrable benefit, they have largely been tested outside of delivery systems and therefore are not widely adopted or translated into mainstream delivery. So with that said, I would, despite the challenges, I think we're also at a time of great opportunity. The Affordable Care Act has been a real game changer in precipitating payment and delivery reform that is shifting the focus towards improving value and performance within systems of care. The focus on population health has really created an incentive for organizations like accountable care organizations to think about family caregivers as natural partners in care and to try to better identify them in a more systematic way and better support them. Also here we see a number of different recent reports about consumer health information technology and family caregiving, and the promulgation and diffusion of a wide range of consumer health information technology products hold promise as a way of increasing transparency and providing family caregivers with greater access to information and supports. Consumer health information technology such as the patient portal allows the opportunity for identification of family caregivers and sharing access to patients' information to family caregivers who have their own credentials and registration to be able to engage in secure messaging with providers, as well as the greater availability of electronic resources and programs to support family caregivers. So my last slide is this quote by Rosalind Carter, which encapsulates the notion that family caregiving is really part of the universal human experience. It says there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who've been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And if this is true, I think the quote raises the question that if family caregiving is a responsibility whether it's something to be borne by each of us individually in our own families, or whether there may be some benefit to public programs and thinking about more systematic identification and support of family caregivers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your interest. I'm really happy to be able to provide some information regarding the Family Caregiver Support Program, both the state of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, and the national program, as well as some other caregiver-related information and resources. Okay. First, just to kind of go over some of the support program goals and philosophy, I think it's important to kind of understand the goals and philosophy of the local and national caregiver support programs. One of the primary goals of the program is really to look at ways of reducing the stress and burden of the caregiver. We try to really accomplish this in a variety of ways. Fundamentally, this involves linking caregivers to support services and information aimed to assist in really carrying out their caregiving responsibilities effectively, while really trying to assure that they too are meeting their own personal wellness needs, emotional, physical, and spiritual. We know that frequently caregivers exert most of their energies on providing care for their loved ones. This results in maybe they becoming isolated or neglecting their own health, becoming emotionally overwhelmed by these responsibilities. Sometimes and frequently they care for more than one person. They care for children. They have work and financial responsibilities, and all of these things, sometimes become overwhelming, and relief really becomes a focus of the program, an essential component of the program. Another real goal of the program is in serving the populations in the program for us to really reach out to communities who are most in need and really tailor our services to be responsive to the unique needs of persons of different cultures, ethnic, religious, and sexual orientation. Okay, just to provide kind of a program overview, both of the National Family Caregiver Support Program as well as the Pennsylvania Caregiver Support Program, just to give some background history. The National Caregiver Support Programs, regarding its inception, the program was originally authorized by the Older Americans Act in 2000. At that time, it became pretty clear the critical role family, friends, neighbors, and other informal supports were playing in caring for our aging population, and going into the future, the need to really establish a formal support system and programs with the knowledge that our older population would be growing in leaps and bounds, resulting in really a significant strain on our health systems as well as our long-term care systems. Development of a coordinated caregiver service and support system was therefore essential in meeting present and future care needs of a population in our communities. Formal caregiver support programs were established, and the responsibility really for administering the programs were given to the Aging Network, including the Administration on Aging, state units, area agencies on aging, tribal units, and providers. Here in the Philadelphia region, the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging was one of the first and original pilot sites and was really instrumental in informing some of the program foundations. And we have here had a program for family caregivers for 25 plus years. Okay, just to kind of give an idea of who we serve, who do the programs serve. This slide really provides an overview of those both served nationally and in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, all the noted populations are served. In Philadelphia County itself, the majority of the caregivers served fall into the first category, those caregivers caring for a functionally dependent person 60 or older. We also provide services to caregivers caring for adult relatives with a disability between 19 and 59 or chronic dementia, and caregivers age 55 and older caring for a relative child age 18 or under who is not the parent. Okay, just some basic program components and, real essential features to the program. Some of these really include providing caregivers with information regarding community services, what's available to them. They could be benefits of a variety of including services and supports, as well as really providing caregiving specific resources and information. The aim is to provide real, direct assistance through referral and facilitation, assisting directly as needed to connect the caregiver to the available services and supports, and really identifying what services and supports would best meet that caregiver's needs based on their preferences. This could be the final component really is respite and also supplemental services, respite care to really provide relief, and this could be in the way of arrangement of personal care aid, companion, day program, or assisting really in mobilizing an informal support network, and supplemental services, which I can kind of go into a little bit further at the next slide. Okay. The Pennsylvania kind of caregiver support program builds on the national family caregiver support components by providing assessment, which includes the identification of the needs and preferences of the caregiver, the care recipient, and really looking at the caregiving environment. In a nutshell, we really try to figure out what are the things most impacting the caregiver, what are the care responsibility, who else is available to help, what is the experience, the relationship with the person they are caring for. Are they working? Do they have other care responsibilities? Do they have physical, emotional, financial, or legal concerns? And foremost, what do they feel would most help them? An individualized care plan is developed based on the assessment and caregiver preferences, and ongoing care management is provided to really respond to the changing needs of the caregiver and that situation, which can change really over time. A care manager provides routine contact and assists in facilitating access to supports and services that are outlined in that plan. They also provide education, training materials, resources, assistance in accessing caregiver support groups, workshops specific to the needs of the caregiver, assist in accessing navigating healthcare services, which can be very complicated, facilitate family meetings in an effort to create, a supportive care network for that caregiver as well as the care recipient, and really also provide advocacy. The purpose is really to implement strategies and assist the caregiver in problem solving to sustain and optimize that caregiving relationship as well as promote wellness for that caregiver. Referrals can be made for exercise programs, yoga, chronic condition management training, legal, financial, advanced care planning, and information related to available technology. All can be very helpful in sustaining the caregiving relationship. Just some additional services. The PA Caregiver Support Program also offers a monthly reimbursement, and though limited, it is some help to caregivers for caregiving expenses to reduce some of the financial strain that caregiver maybe experiences through out-of-pocket expenses. We typically provide approximately $200 to $500 monthly reimbursement depending on the needs of the caregiver and our available funding. These funds can be used, and it's very flexible, can be used to pay for a variety of services and support, including respite care. Caregivers can hire a non-relative to provide care or pay for an adult living center. Funds can be used for ongoing respite as well as if an emergency arises or overnight care. Funds can also be used to purchase medical or caregiving, any types of caregiving-related supplies to ease that burden or in the provision of care. There is some use for limited time for counseling or financial, nutritional, or other legal assistance consultation. We also provide a $2,000 lifetime reimbursement for purchase of home modifications, assistive devices, and other technology, such as ERS systems and home monitoring systems. We can pay for a consultation with an OT, PT to evaluate the home for safety, dementia-related adaptations, stair rides, bathroom modifications, among other things. So really looking kind of at the program focus and our experience, though the reimbursement is somewhat limited and frequently caregivers are expending a lot more than what we're able to provide in reimbursement, one of the elements or some of the elements that we understand presently and really in the future to be, major opportunities of focus and support that's going to be really needed by caregivers in the future, specifically the generation of the information seekers through web information and other opportunities to really optimize the caregiver knowledge and skill base. These things really will be essential in kind of further developing what we're providing, from our program perspective, in expanding really those education training opportunities, developing the caregiver as well as our own workforce competency, and be able to kind of grow our expertise in response to the needs of caregivers of the future, including skill building, which, could be related to the management of the chronic, illness or dementia-related management, problem solving, financial situations as they arise, navigating the healthcare systems, and really these efforts driven to improve sustained quality of life and well-being of the caregiver and supporting the caregiving relationship, because we really understand that, yes, it is the caregiver who is the person who is providing and will be providing in the future the long-term services and supports to our aging population. So really how to access help. At the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, you can call. We have a helpline, which is 215-765-9040, and you can be directed to whatever services and supports are appropriate for you. Your local area agency on aging is probably your best place to start, and as mentioned, Philadelphia Corporation is Philadelphia's AAA. Let me just take a look here. They can really assist you with a variety of access to long-term supports, health, wellness, nutrition programs, protective service, ombudsperson services, among others. If you do not know who your local AAA is, you can go into the Other Care Locator, which is an administration on aging service that provides national resources and assistance in connecting older adults and families to local resources, so you can find your AAA information there. Two other really, great sites are the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. Both sites provide valuable and real comprehensive information and resources to caregivers. They too recently issued a report, a 2015 caregiver report that provides a lot of valuable information related to statistics related to caregiving. Also, the Alzheimer's Association and the Veterans Administration also provide specific caregiver related resources specific to caregiver needs. On the next few slides, I've just provided some of the resource information that you can find. The first, really just caregiving in general. All of those sites have some really great information. Arch, the respite site, has some information for caregivers who are really seeking some respite service and support information. The next is the Elder Locator, Philadelphia Corporation for Aging websites, Alzheimer's and related disorders information, some additional sites there, including a business-friendly site, which could be of interest, the Veteran Service and Support site, and some information related to end-of-life care. So with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Sarah, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was wonderful. And Jennifer and Judith, thanks so much. Your information was incredible as well. Well, we've got a couple minutes for Q&A. I'll go ahead and ask Laura to please open up the lines.
Thank you. And at this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. You'll be prompted to record your name for proper registration. Your name is required to introduce your question. Once again, if you have a question, please press *1 and record your name clearly when prompted. One moment, please.
And I guess as we wait to see if someone has a question on the over the phone, we'll go ahead and look at the chat box. There were a few questions that were submitted by attendees. The first one for Jennifer. You mentioned there being no formal definition of what a caregiver is. Can we assume it's because there are so many different caregiving situations, or would it simply be due to lack of attention and understanding of what a caregiver is?
So it's a great question. The issue is not that I probably misspoke if I said there was no formal definition. The challenge is that there's so many definitions that are used, and how so family caregiving originates from the helping someone with a health problem or disability or impairment. So there are a number of different critical parameters around what constitutes family caregiving within any given definition, including the nature of the reason that they provide help, whether it's with a specific activity, how long the person they're assisting has had that activity, the severity of the impairment, as well as the range of activities that the caregiver assists with. So because family caregiving spans it's basically the entire lifespan, as well as wide-ranging types of conditions, from dementia to stroke, as Judith has shared her experience, to progressive frailty-related physical impairments. The specific definition that's been used in various studies has varied quite a bit, and as the data that I presented show that these varied definitions have very significant implications in terms of operationalizing and comparing who caregivers are, how many they are, as well as their experience. But it's definitely not. The variability is definitely not because of lack of attention or interest.
Great, that's good to hear. So I guess now we've got another question since we've got the chat box open for Judith. Judith, you said there that you had a number of care transitions in a short period of time. Were the transitions difficult? So, for example, were you able to get the necessary medical information that you were interested in? And if they were difficult, do you have any suggestions for public health professionals on how healthcare professionals could go about being more accommodating during those times?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the care transitions definitely were extremely difficult, both within institutions, even from an ICU to a regular floor, or across institutions or institutions to home. And so there's a lot that could be done to improve it. I think the most recent example is maybe a telling example. My mom had been back in the hospital because she was having seizures, and that couldn't be controlled. She was there for about a month and a half, and when she was discharged, she had a very long list of medications, and they have a process with a discharge summary, and the question is, did the necessary medical information get to where it needed to be? We got the information. Technically, we got the information we needed, in that she had a very long list of medications, and the dosages were correct, and we did have that list, and read that list. The nurse read that list to us, but there wasn't enough guidance on exactly details of administration. So, it's just a very long list. Take this 3 times a day, take this twice a day, take this at this time, take this at this times. And so an example of something that would be helpful would be, and what I did, I took that information and I then created a schedule and a day sheet for how the caregivers who would be with my mom on a day-to-day basis should administer that medication. But I think that's an example where in an ideal world, the healthcare system would take that on and would be more qualified to take that on, to create that sort of schedule and to help the people who were helping my mom, if that makes sense. So working on programs or even apps that could develop that kind of schedule, rather than me taking hours and hours, would be the kind of thing that healthcare professionals could really help with.
Great. Super. Thanks, Judith. I guess I'll ask, Laura, was there anyone who posed a question through you?
Yes, we do have a few questions on the phone lines. The first one is from Lena. Your line is open.
Oh, just a quick question about the funding for the program in Philadelphia, where that funding had come from. You know, the monthly $200 to $500 or the $2,000.
That funding is both through the state and national funds, so it's provided through the state caregiver support program as well as the national caregiver support program funding. If that, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. So is it, do multiple locations have access to that, or is it pretty special that you guys do?
The caregiver support program, all of the area agencies on aging in Pennsylvania have caregiver support programs. Here in Philadelphia, we serve here at the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging approximately 750 to 800 caregivers, and we have our own department of care managers, and the assessment and administration of the services come directly from the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging. So if you're from another county, you can call your area agency on aging, and they should have a caregiver support program that would similarly provide, or if they could potentially subcontract with another provider, but a program that would provide a reimbursement program or for caregiving expenditures.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The next question comes from Rebecca Motes. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. I was inquiring because I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am assisting my mom who recently was diagnosed with a stroke, and I'm trying to access all the services that will be available when she does transition out of the rehab. And the program in Philadelphia, I wonder if those exact services can be duplicated, or would you have to try to start contracting on your own with an organization like that to make sure all those services are available for someone who needs those, if that makes sense?
Different states probably have different service provision. The best bet for you would really probably try to call the area agency on aging. I'm not familiar with the services in your state, to kind of discuss and discuss the caregiver supports that are available to you, and they should be able to direct you either to the aging unit in your state or whoever provides the caregiver supports in your state. And you can look that up through, I'm not sure if you're familiar with your own AAA, but you can use the Elder Care Locator on the web to find out who your local AAA is, and they should be able to direct you to the available caregiving support resources in your community.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. I know there are a couple other questions that were posed online through the chat box, and after today's webinar, what I'll do is I'll take those questions, since unfortunately we've come to the end of the hour, and we'll share those with the presenters and get those back to everyone, all the attendees, in addition to the archived web link once it's made available to us. For those of you who have utilized the hand symbol when it comes to the chat box, raising your hand, I really encourage you to enter your question. I'll ask that Laura go ahead as I'm wrapping up this webinar. If you could please leave the webinar on for a few minutes after I've concluded. That way, if folks have another question they want to pose, they can go ahead and do so. Another way to provide a question, to send a question to us that, again, we can share with the presenters is to email that question to Rosie Mae Henson, who you'll notice is noted on the bottom of this last slide. She is going to compile all of the questions that are shared today and make sure that the presenters are able to look them over and provide you with answers. So thank you so much. This concludes our second webinar in the series of Women in Aging. Again, we really appreciate your participation on today's webinar. If you've enjoyed it and you're interested in hearing more about these topics, we encourage you to register for one, if not all, of the other upcoming webinars that we have in this series. The January webinar focuses on reproductive and sexual health. February will be on elderly justice, and then lastly, March will focus on healthy aging. Again, if you have any questions about the series, any questions about today's webinar, and that includes if you have questions to pose to Cheryl and Jennifer and Judith, please send them to Rosie May Henson, and she will take those questions back to the speakers and we'll get answers for you. So again, thanks so much for your participation. Have a great day.
Thank you. This does conclude today's conference. We do thank you for your participation, and you may disconnect your lines at this time.